Coogs House. The Houston Cougars got their guy in Eddie Nunez, so we got the guy that knows the guy.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you enjoy the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below if you consider a pizza a pie. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. It's a great time to join FanDuel. We'll tell you more about that later. But today, we are investigating more on the hiring of Eddie Nuñez as Houston Cougars athletic director. And we're talking to a guy that's covered him for the entire time he's been in New Mexico. That is Albuquerque Journal reporter Geoff Grammer. Jeff's about to stop on with us to talk more about Eddie, about what he did in New Mexico, what he stepped into in New Mexico, and how he left it an incredibly better place afterwards. Let's jump in with Jeff. And we are joined by Geoff Grammer of the Albuquerque Journal, covering sports there since 2012. Jeff, before we go too far, I got to ask a question. Do you consider a pizza a pie?
Pizza a pie? I'm a pizza guy. You can tell by just looking at it. You don't even have the full body shot here, but I don't think it'll surprise anybody watching to know I'm a pizza guy. I think a pizza's a pie, sure.
Yeah, fair enough. People have lots of options. I'm also a pizza guy, and I see what you're going with there. We're really here to break down, though, the big hire that Houston made over the weekend, and Eddie Nuñez coming to the University of Houston as the athletic director. Eddie's been at New Mexico since 2017. Jeff has been covering the program since well before that and has a lot of thoughts. But I guess I want to ask first, when you first heard the news on Saturday, you've been covering this program for a long time. Before we go any farther, what was your first reaction? You saw the tweet, the text, the whatever, oh man.
I will have to start that answer about a week ago. So Eddie's had his name thrown in a few of these searches, right? In the past 3 years ago is when it kind of started happening, where his name started hitting the cycle of these athletic director searches, right? Whether it be search firms kind of planting his name or whoever. So we started covering him, right? When his name would come up, we're like, wait, is there smoke to this, or is there fire to this smoke? And then we kind of backed off because he had actually been associated with probably 5 searches, I would say, that were far enough down the road that it was hitting the internet and hitting social media pretty hard. So we had backed off. I know Eddie really well from his time here, good and bad. We've kind of had our go around a little bit because our jobs always don't always line up. But I just called Eddie. I said, look, how much? Tell me about this one. Is this one close? Or is the Houston thing real? And I got the impression, I will say, from Eddie, that there was more to this than his name just kind of casually being dropped. I can tell you, Darren Ravel about 2 weeks ago mentioned Eddie Nuñez's name in a tweet for Northwestern, and I think that was one that Eddie was like, I have no idea what that one's about. I've never talked to anybody there. But it kind of speaks to Eddie's name was sort of a hot topic name in this world, in this space of college athletic directors and job cycles, right? So I talked to Eddie. I got the indication that this was real, and that he had talked with some people related to the Houston job, more than just sort of a, hey, would you be interested? And as it progressed, and by the time it got to Saturday when he accepted the job, I wasn't surprised at that point. I didn't think it was going to happen Saturday. I thought it was going to kind of be a go through the weekend and think about it through the weekend kind of thing. So a little surprised that it happened Saturday, but not surprised that it happened at that point. I kind of knew it was probably coming.
Well, and I wonder if Pete Thamel, ESPN, I was thinking with the first guy I saw tweet, I wonder if he leaked it in a way that might have forced some hands or not. I will say, though, Eddie and I have one thing in common. I don't know what Darren Ravel is tweeting about half the time anyway. So we both got that in common. I want to now backpedal a little bit and go all the way back to 2017. 2017, Eddie's coming off of a successful 14 years. It's inarguable successful 14 years at LSU. And he is, I believe, was the deputy AD. Is what they call, but the second in charge there. He gets hired to come in and fix a big mess at New Mexico. We should preface this by saying that the criminal charges were all found not guilty for, at that time, athletic director Paul Krebs, and a couple other things involved as well.
Yeah.
What can you tell us in terms of the job Eddie took over and how that shapes his time there? What was the situation he walked into, and how challenging was that for a first-time AD?
You're not going to really be able to paint an accurate picture of Eddie Nunez's time at New Mexico without painting the picture of what he walked into. I know athletic directors and coaches say, "Man, I took over a mess," or "Man, look what I walked into. Look what I inherited." You won't find what he actually inherited here, and what that was an outgoing athletic director in Paul Krebs, who was just last year, but pending from 2015, it kind of all started with a fundraising golf trip that he planned for the athletic department to Scotland, and they were playing on some golf courses there. And just throwing out a name here, you guys do whatever you want, whatever side of this name you want, but they were playing on some Trump golf courses in Scotland. Brought some fundraisers, brought some like a coach on the trip. They were doing this golf trip, right? Well, they used athletic department money to pay for some of this, and that's illegal in New Mexico if you're taking private citizens and using state money. To sort of cover it up, frankly, I'll use that term. It is not he was acquitted on everything, but to somehow an anonymous donor who turned out to be Paul Krebs, the athletic director, when people started poking around at how you're not allowed to do this, an anonymous donor had donated $25,000 to cover some expenses of this trip. They donated it to UNM Athletics. That ended up being also sort of a charge of fraud that was brought by the state attorney general's office. The state auditor was looking into finances, and UNM Athletics not making budget in 20 years in a row, like 15 out of 20 years. There was a lot of financial mess going on, right? And this is from a fairly respected athletic director. It was just a very comfortable athletic director. Nobody around him the checks and balances weren't there. There was a vice president in the main campus at UNM that sort of always found money and found ways to help athletics. And as this stuff started coming up, when they were finding money and all that, people were really starting to scrutinize. And I've never seen an athletic department scrutinized for its finances quite like UNM was right at the time that Eddie Nunez came in. Not only was there a pending federal investigation into his predecessor, Paul Krebs, for fraud and anti-donation clause charges, which were using state money, which is any money that goes into the athletic department at a state college like this in New Mexico is considered state money, even if some of the money put there was by private donors. Once it all goes into the same pot, it's muddied with the same public tag. So he was being charged with all that stuff. It ended up, like I said, no criminal charge. He was not found guilty of any charges, and most people thought that's where it would go. But it lasted from 2015 to 2023, from golf trip to jury trial acquittal. There was also a basketball staffer who was charged with using a team credit card to take cash out of ATM machines for a while. He had a pending felony case that was also just handled last year in 2023. Those were things, and a state auditor's special audit of the department where they had to report every quarter to the state's higher education department about their finances. So he walked into all this. He says he was briefed and told what it was. He said that at the time. I've gotten to know Eddie well enough to know that he would readily admit it was way worse than he ever was told when he came here. And the big thing in terms of his legacy now, and I can mention a couple bullet point highlights that you guys need to know now that he's the athletic director out in Houston. But from then to now, the biggest takeaway in terms of his legacy on the positive side, I would say, is inarguably the way he was able to get the donors' trust back. Alumni within the athletics department, former players, but also donors did not trust the athletics department at that time. They lost trust. The previous regime was so comfortable and so kind of closing its walls around itself that it wasn't letting in new donors. It wasn't letting in people who, the mom and pop business in town that had season tickets for 30 years, they weren't really feeling like they were involved in some of the golf outings and stuff like that. It was only this really small select group of donors, and weird things were going on with money. So there wasn't a whole lot of trust. And as of today, I will tell you that Saturday afternoon, the news on Eddie broke and was made official. Well, Saturday night is the biggest fundraiser every year for UNM athletics, and they call it their Cherry and Silver Gala, and it brought in $1,081,000 for a one-night deal. And you have to remember, while that number may not sound huge like Big 12 money, it's the first time they ever broke $1 million at this one-night dinner fundraiser, and they've set records in fundraising for 4 consecutive years after he reconfigured what is called the Lobo Club, the fundraising arm of UNM athletics.
All right, now if you're like Eddie and you're moving from somewhere like New Mexico to somewhere like Houston, or just visiting New Mexico because it's a nice place to go visit, you're going to need to have a bunch of stuff, whether that's sandals and sunscreen for the beach in Galveston or ski clothes for the mountains in New Mexico, or whatever the case may be. Whenever you're buying stuff, Abota is a free app that helps you get all the money back for all the things that you're getting. Now, Abota is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn hundreds on items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure that you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Abota, you earn cash back that you can withdraw to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Simply add offers in the app, upload your receipt, and voila, the money is yours. Right now, Abota is offering our listeners just $5 just for trying Abota and using the code Locked On College when you register. Just go to the App Store, use Google Play Store, and download the free Abota apps to earning cash back using code Locked On College. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use code Locked On College.
So while there is some money in New Mexico, there's not a lot of it. So when you're talking about the finances and you hear things like UNM set a record in fundraising of like $9.8 million last year, or in one dinner at their Cherry Silver Gala, they brought in $1 million. Those may not sound like huge numbers. I know Houston has some financial problems itself in terms of athletics, but it's all relative, right? In New Mexico, that was big money, and he got the donors back. He got their trust back, and the fundraising is one of the biggest feathers in the cap for Eddie's time at UNM.
Well, and I think the deal is keeping it relative, like you said, right? I think he's coming into a situation in Houston where, bluntly, Houston had the smallest budget of anyone in a Power 4 conference. And I think it's almost weird that the numbers between New Mexico and Houston are as comparable as they are, right? Because New Mexico was coming out of this in 2017. Eddie Nunez shows up and has them as he's leaving, on his way out the door, in a very good financial spot. As someone who covers the program relative to their competition, what can you tell us about like how New Mexico, how the funds are? I mean, they have a very talented basketball team. They just made a big splash hire in football. What can you tell us about the program now, 7 years later?
So look, there's some parallels, right? It is a basketball school right now. At New Mexico, it's always been a basketball school, and getting basketball right was one thing that happened on his watch too. It was actually going through one of its worst times ever, the longest postseason drought until just this past year. New Mexico is genuinely and legitimately one of the final handful of programs in the entire country that have an FBS football program where basketball makes more in ticket revenue than its football program. It's one of, I think, only 3 or 4 that can still say that. Football still makes money even at programs where basketball is doing really good because it has 70, 80,000 seat stadiums. If you're in a conference like the Big 12, even on your worst day, you're still bringing in a Texas. Well, you used to bring in a Texas, and you're bringing in big crowds, right? So there aren't many schools left where basketball is still the financial driver of the bus, and UNM's one of those. So it is also very fair to point out, and the skeptics of Eddie Nunez, and it is fair to say the biggest box he left unchecked in his time here at New Mexico as an athletic director is he didn't get football right. And in 2024, football is what's driving college athletics. We all know that. But he did not get it right. Now, there's some context there as well. He did inherit. Bob Davie was the former coach when he first got hired at New Mexico. That clearly wasn't working in the final several years of the Bob Davie era, and yet he was a little bit handcuffed. Eddie Nunez was. He couldn't really fire him at the time because of some of those financial issues. They did not want, the Board of Regents here was not about to approve firing a coach and paying him a big buyout just to hire another coach and see if he worked. So he had to wait a couple years on that. When he finally did fire Bob Davie, he did the local, he kind of did the popular local guy hire in Danny Gonzalez, who at the time was an defensive coordinator at Arizona State. He was a former player. He had coached under Rocky Long at New Mexico years ago, and then out at San Diego State under Rocky Long. Then he was defensive coordinator at Arizona State, but he's from Albuquerque. Eddie hires this really popular local guy. It didn't quite work out. But again, the context there is year one of Danny Gonzalez's football year was the COVID year. The state of New Mexico was the only state in the country where the governor's health order prevented any school, high school or college, from even practicing in the state, let alone playing. So they had to move the football team out of the state. They lived in a hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada, the entire football season to play that year and to save the TV contract with the Mountain West Conference. They did not have a weight room the entire season, which it not only put the team behind the eight ball a little bit that year, it really kind of started it lost an entire year of the Danny Gonzalez kind of opportunity. Now, they were also financially not paying him or his staff a whole lot of money. So a lot of first-time coaches at that level, first-time position coach who maybe they hired as a graduate assistant from another school kind of thing, right? So there wasn't a lot of money into it. He got rewarded or awarded by the Mountain West Conference this distinguished, I'm going to forget the name, but this distinguished award that they've only given twice ever, to Eddie and then to one athlete in like 2005 or something. They gave to Eddie for essentially figuring out how to keep COVID in a state of New Mexico where athletics were not allowed that entire school year. They still finished or played the season, and it did not cost the league any of its television contract as a result by not having the inventory of all the 12 teams in the league. Then when they come back, attendance never caught up. Football was never really right, and they've never really been able to put a whole lot of money into football. So, yes, he did not check the box of getting football right while he was here. There were some definite, legitimate, more than just like a couple bad recruiting cycle things that are worth context for people to understand as to why football didn't get right here.
Well, and football was not successful in his time there. He did just make a splash hire as a coach, I mentioned, in Rocco Mendenhall, right? And
yeah, A+, whatever. All the people that give grades for such things are raving about it. Bronco, obviously, he used to be an assistant here under Rocky Long years ago here at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And he went on from here to BYU, had a lot of success there, got that job or parlayed that job into an ACC job at Virginia, had success there. And then he basically was living on a ranch in Montana for 2 years, not retired, but needed a break, right? And he and his wife essentially built this ranch up in Montana for 2 years, and where his sons can live one day, the whole family. And he's a really, really unique guy, as nice as can be. But yeah, part of the reason he decided this was the time to break that coaching hiatus, which I won't call a retirement because he did plan on coming back at some point, but he was out of football for a couple of years. Part of the reason he decided to come back was the convincing of Eddie Nunez that, well, why would I go to a New Mexico? Well, Eddie Nunez helped convince him that the leadership, that they were aligned. Their vision was the same. And while it may not be easy, Bronco loved that, by the way. He actually loves rebuilds like this, he says. We'll find out this week, where they're underdogs to an FCS Montana State, by the way, at home. So we'll see if he really likes tough jobs. But part of the reason Bronco came out of retirement was because Eddie Nunez convinced him that, look, we're going to do everything we can to get football right here as best that we can. We do have some limitations. So,
all right, now, if you've been listening to Locked On Coogs for a long time, you've heard us talk about FanDuel a lot. If you've been listening to it just today, you heard me mention at the top of the episode, FanDuel's America's #1 sports book, and that's for good reason. And now they've got something different for you to make sure you're checking out the party over at FanDuel. And it is now through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers can bet $5, just $5, cup of coffee, and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. That with YouTube TV as a base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season game on all Sunday afternoons, even the out of market games. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Again, $5 on a bet. 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and download America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the MLB. I think it's interesting, though, you mentioned the Lobo Club and talking about something he revamped and kind of resurgence in the way that changed the way money got donated.
And he also, at LSU, that was one of the jobs he had in that 14 years. He kind of ran their Lobo Club, their fundraising arm, whatever it was called then. Maybe it's still called whatever it is. But he was kind of the guy that ran that, too. So he has experience at a high level of fundraising and with donors, too.
So what noticeable changes did you see in that? Because whether it's maybe it's the Tiger Club, the Logo Club, the Lobo Club, the Cougar Club, whatever it is, he's doing something there that works, and it worked at the scale of wherever he was. So the Houston scale, I mean, everything's bigger in Texas, right? So what's he going to do?
One of the things he did here was they were the UNM Foundation, the fundraising arm for the entire university, was sort of located off campus, kind of. They didn't have to answer to the same people. So money that was going to the athletics department's Lobo Club had to kind of go through this UNM Foundation, which was kind of a quasi-private, quasi-state public institution. To take away the confusion, he brought it all under the athletics department. Now, what that also did was make it, public record. There was a lot more public record scrutiny and transparency that was required by that. And there have been some lawsuits. There's still some pending litigation as to a reporter sued them for a donor list, right? Like who was donating to this and that. And because you're a public institution, it's a lot of kind of messy stuff that nobody really cares about. But there was some of that. Like he tried to bring it under the university's arm, which made it all public and transparent. But then they didn't want to just disclose all their donors' names. So there's some of that. But by bringing it in-house, he had more direct control. He had more direct influence over some of those donors. They, like I said, the trust that kind of was regained by those donors had to do with his involvement and the athletic department's involvement that was a lot more direct with the Lobo Club. He's a handshaker. He's a running for mayor kind of guy. You'll see him at every football game and at every basketball game, shaking the hands and getting to know the people he needs to get to know. Now, obviously, they're University of at Houston. You got a Fertitta. You got the big time donors, right? He will absolutely shake their hands and understand who to respectfully schmooze with when the time is right. But he's also going to go try and bring in people that are, the more middle class type donors that can really help a program build and get from a handful of really high end donors to really getting a base of donors that are at all different levels, because that's what just as you grow a fan base at different levels, you can't just get the older people. Look, I'm in a newspaper newsroom right now, right? Like I know our readership base. We look in the obituary page every day to make sure our subscribers aren't listed there because we know we lost another one, right? So that's sort of you can't just go for the rich older donors all the time, and he knows that. There are young donor or young alumni organizations that he has really had some people work at fostering around the whole country. When they go play a game, when New Mexico goes and plays a game in New York, the new state of New York UNM alumni chapter will have a big pregame party and a lot of people show up. There's actually a huge one in San Diego which is in the conference. A lot of that kind of stuff at a group of five level, a group of five place program, that's not happening at a lot of schools. He made sure that kind of stuff was the norm. So you start building at that young donor level, and then those middle class donors, once you get to middle age, you maybe have a little more money, and then by the time you're retired and have some money you want to throw around, you're giving it to the university. Like he does that kind of stuff, but he also really has tried hard. And in the state of New Mexico, there's not a lot of big corporations, but he also really tries to get some of those big time, home run donations as well.
And there's a handful of those around Houston. I got two things I want to ask, and one is a little bit more story time and anecdotal, but DMing with yourself, a handful of other people on Twitter, the Lobo Lane, Lobo Gabes. I feel like Lobo insert name is a person, right, on Twitter.
A whole lot. Yep.
Everyone continues to talk about how nice of a person Eddie Nuñez is.
Yeah.
He's new to town. Do you have any quick, just this is Eddie Nuñez in a nutshell, kind of anecdote or story that kind of really tells people what you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's not entirely universal, but it's pretty universal with the Lobo fans now. And again, that wasn't the case even a few years ago. His first several years here was still sort of under this cloud, right? And like people didn't trust him. There's still a few people that don't know whether or not they trust him because there was a lot of trust that was lost here. I will say that one thing Eddie has done a lot of, and I don't know if he can do it at the scale of a University of Houston, but he responds to people. He probably, for better or worse, he does pay attention to social media. I won't say he sits there and reads everybody's comments all the time, but if there's enough complaints about the one thing that's happening at this football game all the time, he'll know about it and he will reach out to people. He has sent direct messages to fans sometimes and said, "Hey, look, you mentioned Lobo Gabe. Lobo Gabe is a local fan here that I know of, and a lot of people here know of. And he is a guy that gets a few drinks in him at some games, and he will spout off and be mad about this or that, no matter what. Well, he was complaining at one game a couple seasons ago about, oh, this is awful. I can't believe UNM is doing this. Had something to do something about a game day experience. Eddie sent him a message that said, "Look, man, I'm here at the game. Why don't we meet wherever you're sitting? Tell me where you're at." He went there, and since then, Lobo Gabe has just like tweeted and posted on social media his love for Eddie Nuñez by just smoothing things over. Eddie is willing to do that. Some people say don't go down into the mud or into the weeds with the fans like that. Some of them are just going to be mad no matter what. Well, for better or worse, Eddie sometimes will do that and try and figure out what the best way to handle a situation is, and that really has endeared him to some. I think maybe some would also argue that maybe the rabbit ears are a little too much, that maybe he pays attention too much to the fan discontent sometimes. Sometimes you have to, as a leader, ignore what the fans say and just trust your vision, right? At other times, you have to remember, well, who am I ultimately working for? It's really the fans. If they're happy and they're coming. So he struck a good balance. I will give him credit for striking a good balance with that here at UNM. It's a whole different scale at the University of Houston. So, like, is he going to be able to? We'll see. And I'm sure I can promise you this. I'm going to be paying attention to it and seeing if he will. He is a guy that, again, when he took over what he took over here, I wrote a whole lot of stories as that stuff kept going. And he was so sick of me showing up to regents meetings. And every time they report on finances, and he was sick of it. And he and I were butt heads sometimes. He is a guy that I've talked to 3 times since he took the job at Houston, and I'll be keeping up with, man. He's we're not drinking buddies or anything, but like he's a guy I will probably reach out to wherever he goes in the future.
You got to be careful though, encouraging Houston fans to have a few beverages and then tweet out complaints, and then they get to meet the AD. They'll take you up on that.
yeah. Let me and for my next trick, let me post his cell phone number right here for everybody to see, and just go and call him, tell him I sent you.
Tell him Geoff said, that's Geoff with a G, sent you. Geoff, last question, and this is more intrigue, but New Mexico is now, as you mentioned, less than a week from football season.
Sure.
Without an athletic director. Now, you can play a game without an athletic director, I guess, but
yeah, there's no recruiting calendar for ADs, but it is a unique time, that's for sure.
What's next?
A few things. First of all, Garnett Stokes, the president at UNM, has to name an interim. I think she will do that tomorrow. I'm hopefully, spending some time with her tomorrow to kind of see what the timetable is. You can do a couple things with an athletic director search. If you're confident with what you have left behind and maybe an interim, I assume the interim director, athletic director, is going to be David Williams, who has been the number 2 for Eddie for several years and been very much the right-hand man, even though there's several senior athletic directors that have different roles. David Williams has been the guy who's on these job searches, right? Like if Eddie flies to Vegas to interview a candidate for, Bronco Mendenhall, when they do these interviews at different cities sometimes, Dave's the guy with him. So I would assume what happens in the very near future is David Williams gets named the interim. He also would love to be the athletic director. I say love. Maybe I'm not going to speak for him. I assume he would like to be the athletic director. So we'll see if that happens. If they know he's the guy, maybe they move really quick. What I think, though, will happen is after he gets named interim athletic director, I kind of think that maybe his success, David Williams, as a pretty competent number 2 in the athletic department, might lead to them feeling comfortable taking their time on this. If they have a new football coach that you're not really, his job security isn't in question in year one. You have a basketball coach in Richard Pitino and a team that just went back to the NCAA tournament. His job security is not really in question. They could very well feel comfortable enough in taking their time with this over the next couple months, maybe. Again, there's not a recruiting calendar or a season for an athletic director like there is for a football coach or a basketball coach. They don't have to get this done by a certain time per se. So I kind of I'm covering the search, and I'm not looking forward to this. I hope this isn't right, but I kind of think they'll take their time, and there may not be a successor named for a couple months.
That's Geoff Grammer, all things New Mexico, Albuquerque, everything in between. Done a lot of writing over the last 7 years ish on head AD Eddie Nunez. Thank you for stopping by, Geoff. It's Geoff Grammer with G's on X/Twitter, wherever. Is that the best place to find you? Where else should people find you?
Yeah, I tweet way too much. I still call it Twitter myself, the Bird app, the X, whatever. But it is Geoff with the G, and it is Grammer spelled ER. I am a reporter who can't spell grammar right, so I have it pointed out to me all the time. And feel free to do so yourself if you guys want to reach out and ask any questions. Let me know. I will say last thing about Eddie is he is a guy that I do think kind of has checked a lot of the boxes as an athletic director and done what you want to do as an athletic director, but he's also been pretty personable. I do think fans, a couple drinks in you or not, I do think fans will like him. Whether or not that leads to success, I don't know. I won't speak to that, but I will speak to as a person. I think a lot of fans are going to like what they get with Eddie Nunez.
I'm excited for it. I think there's a lot of reason for Houston fans to be excited. And frankly, Geoff, as we conclude here, I got to say, one of the things that got me excited was reading some stuff you've written about him. He reads as a very strong AD, and so I'm glad that he's in Houston now. And I hope y'all find a solid replacement, if it is the assistant or what have you. So thanks again for coming on, Geoff. Best of luck to you. I hope we can keep in touch as Eddie continues to build things here.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you. Yeah, and reach out whenever you guys. If Eddie screws up, reach out and I'll talk about it. And if he doesn't, I'll be watching from afar. And if he's succeeding, let me know.
Thanks again to Geoff for coming on today. Locked On Cougars appreciates you making us your first listen. If you're looking for a second listen of the day, I'm going to recommend Locked On College Basketball. They're doing a great job of covering the basketball offseason over there. As you're football season, you can't forget about the things going on the hardwood. Eddie Nunez got you covered. Locked On Cougs, the primary Locked On podcast. Everything's your team, our Houston Cougars, every single day. Go Cougs.